This is Kelsey. I wanted to talk about something that's been cropping up a lot lately in League of Legends news, not just in a single region, and multiple regions, and that's role swaps. So, in the past few weeks, we've had a couple examples, including the famous Team Liquid Piglet to mid lane. In Europe, we've had Expeke going to support, going on his fourth role now, and then in China, we've had multiple players going to support and a bunch of other stuff, but I'm not gonna go on the long list. The important ones are gonna be SFM and Crystal going to support on Sneak Esports, and then EasyHoon going to support on BG Gaming. I wanted to talk a little bit about why this is, and first of all, touch on kind of some of the perceptions of role swaps and maybe why teams are seeing them as more useful or more attractive right now. I think right now what it gets to is kind of this period in League of Legends we're having, which is almost a talent gap period. We're getting to this point where a few pros from Season 1, Season 2, Season 3 are aging up a little bit. They aren't maybe too old to play the game, but they've started to develop other interests, wanting to maybe go back to school, have less hourly demanding jobs, maybe have a life, I don't know, just a few suggestions here and there. And we're getting some retirements, but we've gotten to a point also in the game where you require kind of a larger knowledge base than when the game started. We've had more complexity in team play development. People are learning just fundamentals of the game that don't even change with the patch, right? Like minion control, how to play off of high pressure lanes, things like this that have nothing to do with patch. They're just like basic ideas or instincts that you learn as a pro player and that you are reinforced constantly when you're playing the game as a team. After these players leave the game, you expect to have this new generation start to fill this empty position, right? But suddenly you realize that there aren't necessarily people waiting. If you look at all of the examples that I mentioned just now, early at the opening of the video, you'll notice that it's an example of an established known quantity player in a different role replacing a rookie. Of course, Golden Glue, not necessarily a rookie since he played in LCS before for the required period of time, but he was in Challenger for a while afterwards, so you kind of lose some of the higher level aspects of play there, and then you're back in it again, like you're reborn, and it's the Madonna song. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. I'm not going to sing it. It's that these are younger players. Mo, support player, getting replaced on Snake. BG Gaming replaced their rookie support from last year, Caveman, with Hatong, who was role swapped. And then he was a mid laner before, but he wasn't really good at... I don't understand the deal with Hatong, but the point is that they replaced last year's rookie player, and now they have a VG Gaming CC Hoon. So the question becomes, why is this incentivized, or why is this something that teams think is a good idea, or that they're having an issue with? First of all, if you look at some of the explanations that are given for why these role swaps are made, like in the Team Liquid video where they talk about Piglet's attitude is just so good, and, the thing is that they have this long explanation about, we recognize that Golden Glue is underperforming on the roster, we understand the damage dealt in teamfights associated with that, we understand that the meta is very different than where our strengths lie as a team. Really weird explanation. I don't know why they kind of tunnel visioned on blaming Golden Glue, but he obviously is having a really hard time, but it seemed like for them to isolate that particular member was strange, and then they keep bringing up throughout the video the strengths of Piglet, how hard he wants to work. So it seems to me like the role swap is done even for mentality or approach to the game reasons more than even just that Golden Glue is underperforming. The BG Gaming explanation for why they swapped EasyHoon to mid was that they wanted EasyHoon to be able to shot call better. Previously, last year, when they were talking about Caveman and Dandy was teaching Caveman how to shot call, kind of, right? And then you get to this position where now Dandy is no longer on the team, and obviously VG Gaming CEO said the terrible things about Bengi, and said that you need EasyHoon to take on additional burden for shot calling. I mean, these kinds of explanations are really not uncommon. You're putting people with game knowledge into a position where they can do something effective. Everyone has heard the Expeke effect, so that brings us full circle. Why is expected going to support? Well, support is a role where you can shot call better. You don't necessarily have to be super mechanically intensive. This is a really, really common explanation, right? Is that you can focus on shot calling more. You can focus on these types of aspects. The mid lane rotation thing is just, mid lane has a higher impact. We know Piglet is a high impact player. So fitting these types of strengths from a known quantity player into these roles rather than taking the time to necessarily train the rookie that you already have on your roster to get to that point. You're saying that it's easier for a player who already knows the game to learn a new role, which I don't necessarily disagree with. I actually think that if you know the aspects of team play already, that's one advantage that you can have, as opposed to knowing the role and having to learn the aspects of team play that are necessary. However, this also means that we do indeed have a gap of players that aren't immediately able to fix. And the question becomes whether or not this gap is created because we've done a poor job training, or because we just haven't looked for the right players, or some other factors like this. I actually do think that it's a combination of a lot of things. We've had historically a low incentive to develop talent. For example, everyone speaks really, really highly of the Korean ethic. Like Vici Gaming said, in Korea you can find many good players, even among their practice players, like Doinbi, like Cooney, players like this. In China, I think maybe culturally young players don't see esports work as pro gaming. Perhaps they just think I can play games and earn money. In Korea, they think this is my job. So people talk about the mentality a lot, this type of thing, where it's like there are a bunch of reasons people give for just importing certain Korean players to take over these positions and not necessarily scouting their own stuff. I've talked about this way too much, so I'm not gonna say this. Other incentives, I think, and I did a piece on this in terms of the European Challenger Series, where I feel like the Challenger Series historically, especially recently, has been take existing LCS level talent, farm a spot, sell a spot, these types of situations where you're, again, incentivized to have experienced players and not necessarily use Challenger as a tool to develop your talent. You don't necessarily have the monetary resources in regions outside of China or maybe the ethical considerations are too large in regions outside of China to have places where you can develop newer, younger players in a safe space, or just have these people on your roster that aren't necessarily ever going to play or do anything for you for years at a time, maybe, who are starting to learn these aspects of team play. Solo queue, again, not really helping us. Another factor, I think, is longer contracts. We're signing these players for 3 years. If you get to a point where the player isn't really feeling like playing a high-intensive mechanical role, but their knowledge is still valuable to you, and you have him on a 3-year contract, you have more of an incentive to play him and play him into a new position than to scout a new player. And I think that these explanations are consistent with reasons that you've seen in the past Korean teams role swap as well, because when in 2015 people started importing a lot of Korean players, they didn't just take experienced Korean players. They took a lot of the people from the talent farms that the Koreans had, so they basically had no alternative but to sort of role swap a bunch of players to jungle, like Score and Ambition and things like this, to put them in a high game knowledge role with players who have these kinds of experiences. So I think that this is a really interesting thing to consider when you look at role swaps, is why this is happening. I also think that the positive side of this is potentially we'll see more success with role swaps. So for a really long time we had role swaps happening because the barrier to entry, the knowledge of how to play the game, was sort of low, right? So you could just play top, mid, whatever, and you didn't really get established roles until the end of Season 1. In China, there's this really rich tradition of role swapping, kind of put forth by OMG, because you had, even in scrims, where the team would talk about how they would just role swap and play different roles to sort of have a better perspective on the game holistically and how to play the game, and then learn knowledge that way. In Korea, people say that there's much more fill. In solo queue, people just have a better baseline understanding that allows them to role swap in solo queue more effectively. So then you have this period of time where role swaps are really hard, and we have this weird perception that role swaps are the most horrible thing you can possibly do, and it's always just going to be a failure, because I think the knowledge, the baseline team play knowledge, wasn't really there to give you a solid foundation to role swap so that you could draw on this when you're learning a new role. It was like you're relearning the entire game. And now I think we've got to the point where we have a lot of experienced players who just kind of understand the game well enough that they can have success when they start role swapping more often. I mean, there have been a lot of successful cases of role swaps that I think we kind of overlook when we see a role swap. It's like, oh, they really have no idea what they're doing, you know? They're just trying this out. They're making flash grab, but there have been a lot of successful cases. We mentioned Ambition, Score. In the West, we've had Yellow Star. Just generally speaking, I think we could see a period of time where we're actually having a lot more success with role swaps, and it could be really good. And that's kind of a little bit of what I'm afraid of, because if we get to the point where we're recycling a lot of these players, we're, again, just not focusing on the real issue, which is the real problem, which is we don't have players to replace them. And we need to start thinking about sustainable ways to train players to get to this level of team play, because the game has evolved to this point where it's not just good enough to take this like hotshot rookie from solo queue who can come in and he's gonna like 1v9 everyone, because that doesn't really happen anymore. Even if you have like super talented rookies, like some of them just have what it takes almost right out of the gate, right? But even then, like, the game has gotten to this team play level where it's too much and you can't necessarily just do that, even if your player is like as talented as could be, has zero stage fright, none of these issues at all, and just mechanical ceiling is unheard of. He's not going to be able to 1v9 for you. So the incentive to get like these super talented mechanically trained rookie over role swapping your owner slash ex mid laner to the support role isn't necessarily gonna be there. And so for me, this is really worrying, because you need to have the ability to get like the super hotshot mechanically trained rookie to a place where he can have the same basic knowledge of team play as this guy, maybe not as much as like the owner who's played the game forever, but as someone who's played a season or a couple of seasons and has just played in a team environment for a while. Using the subs, I think, is something effective. If you have a sub, like giving subs more scrim time, I think is a good way to do it. Letting them just be present in team discussion. I think present in team discussion is really important so that they understand kind of the perspective and what's going on. I know like attention spans are weird, so I'm not really sure how well that would go. Just factors like this, because I think that if we have an higher incentive, and there's reason to believe that role swaps might even become like super successful, and this new trendy awesome thing in League of Legends, we'll have even more reason to just like not kind of fill in these gaps, and eventually we'll get to this place where it's like, no, I'm not playing anymore. Because like, you want me to move to jungle now? No, I can't. I'm done, guys. Pi eventually is going to say, yeah, my wrist is actually just falling off of my arm. I literally can't play jungle or mid or anything anymore. What are we going to do? So, yeah, train better stuff, train better players, everything else. And of course, I say this and it sounds really simple, but if it were, there wouldn't be a problem. Anyway, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed.